Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with admissions consultant Shirag Shemmassian about getting into and choosing the right law school for you. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today we're talking with Shirag Shemmassian about how to decide which law schools to apply to and where to ultimately choose. Shirag is the founder of Shemmassian Academic Consulting. They work with both undergraduate and graduate students to get into school by offering individualized admissions consulting. So welcome and thanks for joining us on the podcast. We love to talk to people about how to get into law school.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So first off, can you give us some background about your college and graduate school experience?
Yeah, sure. So I went to a small high school in LA that didn't have very great college counseling. So it was sort of like they guided you to local schools, but if you wanted to go elsewhere, say on the East Coast or even Northern California or anything like that, then the knowledge was limited. So I had to teach myself essentially how to get into top schools. The other layer to all this was I grew up with Tourette syndrome. I was diagnosed around age 8 or age 9, and it's a diagnosis I still carry to this day. So even though, it doesn't impact my IQ or anything like that, I think there were a lot of teachers and staff and things like that just didn't think I could do as well as other kids. So they sort of didn't push me either. I know this because I even heard teachers say things like, you're going to be a failure, or you're not going to get into good schools and things like that. But even, my parents and other family friends and stuff, they wondered aloud whether, I'd be able to make it and things like that. So I sort of resolved to learn everything I could. I enrolled at Cornell and I graduated debt-free from there. And then eventually, a year after graduation, was able to enroll at UCLA for their clinical psychology PhD program. Completed that in 5 years, also debt-free. And then I was helping people this whole time get into top colleges and graduate schools. I think people saw my success not only on the admission side, but also on the financial aid side.
Yeah.
People just started asking me a lot of questions, and then I was helping them get in and them get a bunch of scholarships and stuff. So over time, word of mouth grew, and I really enjoy admissions. I'm a total admissions nerd. I read about this stuff all the time. People are like, don't you already know all this? I'm like, I don't care. Like, this is like my weird interest. And so I just, love getting to know people, love storytelling. And at the same time, it's incredibly fulfilling because these are huge processes, very high stakes, very high stress, and they determine, some aspects of your career and earnings and things like that. It's not everything, but, it's a big piece of people's education and career. So, I don't take that trust lightly, and it's such an honor to help students out.
Well, what a fascinating story. I mean, I think we hear so often from students who are maybe have a learning difference or some sort of disability, or as you were saying about your Tourette's, that you can get all of this kind of negative feedback that I think plays into this idea of imposter syndrome, or that you're not really cut out. So how did you kind of have the right mindset at such an early age to either ignore or do something with all of this negative information that you were getting, but still be able to be self-confident enough to land yourself at a place like Cornell, which is not exactly an easy school to get into?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'd be lying if I said, I just sort of like, rolled off the, bounced back or rolled off or anything like that. Because it was hard. Like, it's hard to hear from parents. It's hard to hear from, teachers. It's hard to be made fun of by peers and things like that. But the good news was, like, nothing they said had any evidence behind it. right? So like I was doing just as well in school. I was like the valedictorian of my junior high, and I think one of them in my high school. So I was always like doing well in school, and I was succeeding in sports and things like that. And you know, I wouldn't say I was like super popular or anything, but I wasn't an outcast or anything like that. So I was just like looking around. It's like, hey, like all these people are saying I'm not going to be successful for this and that reason, or I'm not going to be able to cut it or whatever. But I was doing just fine. And so I was like, you know what? I have this dream and I want to do it. And then at the same time, and I don't know that this was necessarily the healthiest, but I also like wanted to prove people wrong. So I think it's this twofold thing of proving to myself that I'm just as capable and getting into these great schools, but also, you know, proving other people wrong and stuff like that. The reason I say it might not have been as healthy is because, like, you know, it's not like people were waiting to see, oh, he did it, now we're all wrong and stuff like that. Right. They were sort of just like saying what they thought. And, you know, I was probably internalizing that stuff more. And, you know, it's not like me getting in was fulfilling something, you know, when I proved them wrong or whatever. So, yeah, I just sort of kept my eyes on the goal, figured, you know, why not try? I think a lot of times when people have learning differences or they told they can't do X, Y, and Z, they sort of like buy into that and don't try. And then, you know, it's sort of self-fulfilling because if you don't apply, you obviously don't get in, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just been very important, you know, for me to stay empowered, but also to empower other students who, for whatever reason, don't think they can get in somewhere, whether it's a disability, slightly lower LSAT score or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that there is that important distinction of, you know, owning your own process. So for me, I was very fortunate that I had parents who were really pushing me to, you know, to stretch and go for those goals. But my high school counselor, who I do not believe listens to this podcast, he told me there was no way. I went to Claremont McKenna College in LA, and he told me that I was likely not going to get in. I mean, and I was, you know, near the top of my class, you know, 4.0 GPA, on the student council, like on a varsity sport. I mean, like all of these things, like I had a pretty good shot. I was from a small town, but I had a pretty good shot. And he pretty much told me it was a waste of time to apply. And he spent all of our counseling sessions telling me how I needed to adjust down my expectations. And so I remember brokering this deal with him during the process because I applied early decision to Claremont, and I said if I got in, he was going to allow me to drop this science class that I hated for the second semester because I didn't need it anymore. And he was so sure that I wasn't going to get in that he like made all these deals with me, and then I walked in with my admissions letter, and it was basically like, no more physics for me.
I love that.
And he was shocked, you know, and I think that there is something about that mindset of, you know, you do have to own your own journey, and hopefully you have the right people encouraging you. But if you don't, it's still your journey, and you have to, you know, bust your butt to get whatever results that you want. And I think there's nothing wrong with stretching as long as you do have some safety options out there.
Exactly. And the thing is too, when folks discourage, it's like, you know, unless it's taking so much attention away from, you know, your target schools or your sort of borderline target reach schools or whatever, what is the downside, right? Like if you're approaching this stuff ahead of time and you're approaching it thoughtfully, and, you know, your school list doesn't entirely comprise far reaches or anything like that, like what's the downside? I just wonder sometimes, like, why are certain folks so discouraging of certain applications? If someone's like even remotely in the ballpark, it's like, who cares? Like, it's probably like another one or two essays. If that, and if they're willing to pay the application fee, like, it is what it is, right? And it's much better. I'm the type of person, and I know many of my students are like this, where, you know, I would wonder what if, and simply not wondering what if is worth it, is worth the application effort.
That's
you know,
a good point.
And rather than wonder, well, what could have been, and I went to the school, I don't know if it was the best place for me. Well, find out what all your options really are, and make decisions based on the informations and outcomes you have.
Yeah, because you might even be surprised at where you feel like you fit best. You never know.
Totally. Or who gives you aid or whatever.
Right. Yeah, there are lots of factors. I think we'll make sure we talk about money because I like the fact that you clearly know how to work that system too. But so you said you're an admissions nerd, which is cool. I'm a law school nerd and a bar exam nerd. So, you know, I have to hire people who think like me so we don't feel weird about what we're nerdy about. But,
that's right. It normalizes things.
Exactly. So what do you think it's about the admissions process that you find so intriguing?
Yeah, I think it's this combination of, you know, how does data, right, these quantifiable factors like grades and test scores and things like that, fit with what you've done, how you spent your time, what drives you, but then how do you sort of communicate that story? I think a lot of times we try to oversimplify every admissions process, and I think this is very true of law school admissions since it's so contingent on stats and things like that.
Right.
But we still oversimplify, right? And it's like, well, I have these stats, I think I can get in here, but not here, etc. It's like, well, actually, there's a lot more to think about. So it's just like getting to know people and figuring out, okay, like what have I done? Where have I demonstrated my passions and my interests? Who am I personally? Right. And how does this all come together to tell the story of like how I arrived at law and why I'm going to make a great lawyer. So it's just like fitting all this stuff together and figuring out, okay, like how can we deliver it in such a way that will make the admissions committee see you as an asset to their community, not just, you know, another applicant. And so that mystery and that process is something that I love.
I really like that idea. I was just talking about a similar thing in the context of trying to kind of build your job application on the other end of law school with someone who had some life events happen that had caused this student to take some academic missteps and then kind of was getting her act back together to move forward again. And, you know, wondering if those academic missteps due to these external factors would really have kind of sunk her chances at certain jobs. And I said, I don't think so, but you've got to have a story, you know? And so it's like, what are you going to do to change the story? What are you going to say? Who's going to say you took missteps because like external things happened in your life? Like that is life. Life's going to throw those things to you. It's what you do with those missteps in the story you can tell. So if you get your act back together and then become academically successful, then you can just say, these things happen. This is my story. Look how I got my act back together because I'm a grown up and this is, you know, this is life. And if things happen, you know, I can turn them around. And I think that being able to craft these stories is an important life skill too, because it happens over and over and over again.
Oh, for sure. It's like, it's everywhere. You're right. It's with applications for law school, for jobs, for fellowships, for church. I mean, like you name it, right? Like you constantly have to communicate this stuff. And you touched on something really importantly, which is a lot of times when students, you know, approach these applications, they think about, well, how can they present themselves in this like perfect light, like they figured it all out. I had this challenge, but it's no longer a challenge for me. Here's how I figured it out. I'm the best. And something I always say is like, be human, right? Like that's how we work. And so if you can communicate, you know, what you have dealt with and what you've sort of overcome, what lessons you've learned, how you've applied it, but how you're still a work in progress, I think that's a really human way to communicate this stuff, because they're not just looking for achievements and victories, they're looking for introspection and thoughtfulness and things like this. So the more, you know, you can focus on the qualities you want to communicate, whether you're applying for law school or a job or you're interviewing, that's the stuff that really comes through.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, if you went and got your PhD in clinical psych, you have to love people's stories, right? I mean, how do you do that work? So you went into this like because
chicken and the egg.
Yeah. So true. And you know, most people who are going to one of these new goals of trying to go to college or graduate school, almost everybody needs a therapist anyway to get through these.
I know that.
These transitions. All right. So, you know, when you're thinking about this decision to go to law school, and we kind of touched on this, you know, creating this list of schools, how do you suggest that students go about choosing a list of law schools to apply to?
Yeah, so I think what folks do is, you know, they think about what's ranked well.
Yeah.
And where do their stats align? So, you know, they look at a school's median GPA and LSAT score, or they'll look at the middle 50th percentile scores, and then like places they want to live, and they do it just based on that. And that's actually not a horrible approach. It's just incomplete.
Yeah.
Right? So I think like even let's take for instance like a sliver of law schools, the top 14, the T14, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes people say, I want to get into a T14 school, and I'm like, well, which one? I don't know a T14 school, but like obviously anyone who's involved in law admissions or has gone to law school knows like these aren't all created the same, right? So there are a few things to consider. There's obviously your grades and LSAT score. We want to consider where you did your undergrad, where you want to live, your ability to pay for school, what the cost of various law schools and things, who's going to meet need, etc. But then also like considering what it is that you want to do afterwards, and thinking about that from a geographic standpoint, but also what that school offers. So for instance, if I like had really, really high scores and I want to be an academic, well, I might prioritize getting into Yale over Berkeley.
Right. Like right.
But then if I wanted to pursue like public interest, I might go to Georgetown over Virginia or something like that, right?
Yeah.
I'm obviously like stereotyping a little bit here because, a number of these schools specialize in a number of things, etc. So fit, I think, is incredibly important. That doesn't mean that you have to have it all figured out going into law school. But if you can take some educated bets, that's a good job. So like, for instance, you might know that, hey, I'm deciding between these sort of three areas, I'm not sure, but you feel really, really confident that you're not interested in intellectual property or corporate finance or something like that. Well, those can help you filter certain schools out or to prioritize the early applications to the ones you're more interested in, etc.
Right.
And then also obviously location fits into that. So if you're in a financial hub, then you're going to have more opportunities for local internships and local networks and things like that. So considering the full spectrum, I think, is really important. And then also having balance. So, going back to an earlier point you made, Lee, about having some reaches, some targets, and some safeties, but making sure that all of the schools within those categories are places that you'd be happy.
Yeah.
I think sometimes students are dishonest with themselves when they say, oh yeah, these are my 3 targets, or okay, so the thought experiment you should play or you should do is, okay, if I didn't get into any of my reaches and I got into all of my targets, there'd be one of those schools that I'd be really happy to attend.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then we have to keep refining.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get in a situation where you didn't get in anywhere you liked and you're just super bummed about the process.
I think that that's a really good point. And I was having another conversation with a different student. Clearly, I've been on the phone all morning. But we were talking about how life is what's happening when you're in law school and you want to, set up this experience to hopefully enjoy it and not just be miserable, that life is too short. And I think that sometimes folks forget that school is an elective decision, especially graduate school. You are choosing to follow this path. You are choosing to probably maybe invest financially in this path, and you are building for your future. Not to say that it's going to be easy, and law school is not easy for most people, but it doesn't have to be traumatic, where you need to go to one of your clinical psychologist friends to cope with the decision that you've made to go to law school. Hopefully
you don't want to be friends with us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think that there is that element too of location, and do you not just location but school culture, and another big thing, especially outside of some of the larger schools, this is more of a consideration in the more regional schools, is do you want to go to a commuter school or do you want a school where everybody's living near campus? That's a big thing in California, both in San Francisco and in Southern California. I think even Southern California more. You've got really lovely schools. Loyola is one of them that comes to mind immediately, where people don't really live around Loyola. So if you are, planting yourself in LA and you don't have any friends and you're just showing up at the school, you've got to know that people are driving from different parts and everyone comes to campus to do their stuff and then they probably leave. And are you going to be okay with that? Because not everybody's okay with that. Some people want, that school culture where even they might have dorms or on-campus housing or something like that. And I think people forget to ask those questions.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I feel like, Leah, I'm not sure if you have this experience, but I have it often where I think students make sort of short-sighted decisions that, they might not have a lot of insight into given sort of their phase of life or what have you. Like, for instance, back, or sometimes when someone's in their early to mid 20s or something like this, their considerations are very different than I would have, sort of reflecting back on those times.
Oh, sure.
Like, for instance, like a lot of people say, oh, it's only 3 years. And then if I do a clerkship in these like places that I'm not that into, it's only another 2 years, etc. Mm-hmm. But those years are really meaningful, right? Like I've always thought that not all years are created equally. And so, your 20s are like a special time, your 30s are a special time, whenever it is that you decide to go to law school. So there is no reason to like grin and bear it for X amount of time just because you think it'll set you up for this like wonderful future thing. In other words, you can have a good time, during your law years and after. It's not like you have to suffer now to reap some benefit later, right?
Right.
And so considering your lifestyle and all that kind of stuff is truly important. Where do you want to live? Who do you want to make friends with? Where do you want to potentially practice in the future? All of these are major considerations. It's not just going to the quote-unquote best, even though that is a consideration.
It's true. I mean, life happened. I met my husband between my second and third year of law school, and he was not associated with the law school, but, like that was a major life shift. All of a sudden I was, I started making plans, caring about another person. My path kind of changed, not long after graduation when we decided to kind of settle down together and things like that. But, that life all happened while I was in law school. I was in my late 20s, and that's oftentimes can be when you meet somebody and, or maybe you have a family situation and you have to relocate and you need to start over in a different community. Like, you can't plan out this whole thing. And I think you make a good point. Like, these aren't wasted years. These are like part of your life, and you should be able to make the most of it. I think school's really fun in a lot of ways. I had worked between undergrad and law school. I worked a lot. I worked for a consulting firm. I traveled. I wasn't particularly happy at some of those years too, which I've definitely talked to my therapist about. But, but I think I did have that short-sighted of like, well, I'm just doing this to do it now, yada, yada, yada. And then, there is something about saying, this is my choice of where I want to live for the next 3 years, how I want to spend my time. I'm paying money or doing some sort of investment in myself to do this. Or even if you have a great school situation where you're not paying a bunch of money to go to school, you have the opportunity cost of not working. So you're giving up something to be there. Just make sure that it doesn't need to be a torturous experience. And if it is, maybe you should transfer and try somewhere else.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. So other thoughts about kind of things that students should take into consideration where they're making this list, like how many schools should be on a list for most people?
Yeah, it depends on the overall competitiveness of the list. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if someone tells me, I have 9 schools on my list, is that good? Well, I don't know if it's good. Are 7 of them far reaches? Right. So we have to dig a little bit deeper. If you have, let's say, for instance, a student is only applying to 6. Someone might think that's crazy, but perhaps 2 of the 6 are safeties that we can all but guarantee the student will get into, and then everything else is playing with house money. Fine. Right. But then if you want to have more spread and apply to more reaches, well, then you should probably increase the total number of schools to accommodate those kinds of things. Depending on how confident you are in your targets and safeties and things like that, I recommend somewhere between 9 and 15 schools for most students, roughly broken down into thirds. And of course, there's wiggle room here. Like I said, so the 9 schools doesn't have to be 3, 3, and 3 safety target reaches. It could be 2, 3, and 4 if we know that the 2 safeties are like, more or less shoe-ins. Of course, we want to 100% assume anything, but we can be reasonably confident. So that's the way I think about it. But let's say a student has like 3 safeties and just wants to do the rest reaches. Great. But I always say, let's balance competitiveness and rank, and make sure that we have enough in each category to help you feel confident going into it.
What's your perspective on going straight through to law school or taking some time?
Yeah, it's a highly individual decision. My experience, Lee, with this is people who go straight through will say they're glad they did it straight through because that's what they did, right?
Yeah.
People who took 2-3 years off will say, I'm so glad I took 2 or 3 years off because, I wasn't ready to go straight through, etc. I don't know if that's actually the case for people, that they're glad they did what they did, but it's, not to get too psychological here, but cognitive dissonance, right? You're sort of saying, I did this thing because, and sort of in retrospect, we think about how that was a good decision. So if you have the stats and you're ready to go straight through, I'm not one to say, oh no, don't go straight through, you're going to get burned out, you should live a little, or something like that. At the same time, if someone's like a little bit apprehensive, or they're feeling a little bit of like, if I hear that a lot of it is like outside pressure, like a parent saying like you're wasting your years, like all that kind of stuff, then that might actually be a signal that we need to have a conversation about, hey, is this right for you now versus later? I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would say I think I'm about of one mind. I think if you go straight through, my question to folks is always, do you really want to be a lawyer? Because I do think oftentimes it's like, I don't have a job, so I might as well go to law school. I'm a good student, so I might as well go to law school. And especially if you are paying for this or taking on debt, I really encourage people to want to do it and make sure that that's what they want. I have friends that went straight through who are highly successful attorneys, but they knew exactly what they wanted to do. I think the happiest ones are the ones who went to school knowing what they wanted to do. And then, they were younger than everybody and are going to make partner earlier, so that's something. But I do think that there are a lot of benefits from taking that break and experiencing a little bit of life, especially when it comes to the job hunt. I know that my 4 years between undergrad and law school were something that was discussed a lot in my big firm interviews. And I think that they appreciated the fact that I had been in an office environment. I had worked with clients. I had worked with client sites. I, was comfortable with a level of professionalism that I think is hard to get without some of those professional experiences, and that working at that firm would be my first job. And then I've made some of those really, really rookie mistakes on someone else's dime instead of theirs. So I think that there can be a lot of benefits to waiting and getting a little bit of life and making sure that this is what you wanted to do. And I think if you take a break, school seems sweeter. I remember going back to school and going to like a 2 o'clock yoga class one afternoon and thinking how decadent that seems, because I wasn't at my desk, at my office, in my high rise. I was at yoga at 2 o'clock. And I think it's nice, it's a benefit of school, is you have so much more autonomy about how you spend your time. And that seemed so refreshing after a few years of working a lot and traveling for work and things like that. Yeah,
I like that. I think my experience between undergrad and grad school was I graduated, and then that fall I applied to grad school. So I only took a year off. I personally, it was good for me. I know people who took more time, and that was the right decision for them. And I think you pointed to it. Like it's highly individual. Like if you're ready and you know that you want to do this, it's great. But if you're doing it out of anxiety, either I'm gonna be too old, or I don't really have a job, or I should get a grad degree, like these sort of these reasons that aren't I want to become a lawyer,
right?
Then I think that should be a red flag.
And I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier with this, what's your story? Like, what's the story you're going to weave? And if you're saying I have to go start my career, well, you also have to take into consideration that if you want some of these large, corporate jobs, that your resume might be sitting next to somebody who did already have, professional accomplishments, and maybe you've only had part-time summer jobs. Right. And that doesn't mean that if your last job on your resume was, working at Nordstrom during the summer, there are actually a lot of really good life lessons you can pull out of that and contain in a cover letter. Recruiters actually love any sort of customer service work because it shows that you can deal with angry people. Yep. But you still have to think about like what's going to be your story. How are you going to show that this is what you really want to do? And so, maybe taking that year and, working in a law firm, even if it's just, part-time or, just getting exposure to things can kind of create that story and also give you confidence that this is really what you want to do.
Totally.
All right. So let's say we've done all this heavy lifting and we've gotten in, and maybe you were so lucky you've gotten into a few places. So now what do you do? How do you decide where you should go?
Yeah. So this changes the dynamic, right? Like, on the front end, I know people always say, oh, you're evaluating them and they're evaluating you, et cetera, et cetera. But like, they're the ones with the power, right? So it's like a seller's market. And they're the ones who sort of hold, are the gatekeeper. Once you're in, now you can sort of go digging a little bit more and you have choices. And they also want to impress you and enroll you and all that kind of stuff, right? So This is when you can start asking like more questions about comparing financial aid offers and seeing if you can negotiate more aid, or talking to current and former students about their experience, and a lot of times talking to current and former students is actually the best way to get the real scoop, because obviously an admissions committee and faculty who interview and stuff like that, they work for the school, right? Their perspective is skewed, right? They're trying to make the school look great and market the school and all that kind of stuff. So go digging a little bit, read forums online, talk to current and former students, ask the admissions committee folks, questions about opportunities that you'll get to have or not have and things like that, and just weigh all the options. There's also something, we were talking about location earlier. It's all great in theory, like, I would totally go to that school. But then when you have two admissions offers in your hands, it's a very different thing. Like, for instance, and I went to Cornell for my undergrad, so I feel, I get to say this. But like, in theory, it might be great for you to go to Cornell. You might be really excited about it. And then you get in and you're like, well, do I want to live in Ithaca for 3 years?
Right.
It's lovely, but is that what you're looking for the next 3 years? Right? And so when you actually have admissions offers in hand, you can actually envision what your life would be like in place A versus place B.
Right.
And so like really reflect on that. Obviously, if you're in a relationship or there's, people are going to have to move with you, or there's something else that's going to have to change, like consult those people too and consider like what life are we building here? Not just where am I going to law school and where do I have to, quote unquote, grin and bear it for the next 3 years?
Right. Because life is happening while you're in school. So
that's me.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing, I didn't, I took the soft way out weather-wise and went to school in Southern California. Yeah. But, my friends who went back east and went to places like Cornell, you also have to factor in like weather and lifestyle, because I think that for a lot of people, that can be a really hard transition, and seasonal affective disorder is like no joke if you're not used to it and you're not ready to take that on.
Yeah, weather is real.
Yeah. Yeah. So, think about, that. Also, I think, are you an urban person and you want to live in an urban place? I think Allison talks about she wanted to really live in New York. And so she went to Columbia because that was one of the things she wanted to do, was to move to New York. And so she was very sure about that. But a lot of people don't like cities. So maybe you should consider not going to law school in a city.
Yeah, absolutely. And fortunately, given the number of law schools we have in this country and where many of the great ones are located, you do have choice, right? Like right. There is a spectrum of locations and experiences and specialties and stuff like that within every tier.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, a lot of people are focused on getting into kind of top choice law schools. This can be different for tiers or rank for the different person, because everybody's top choice is kind of different. So what are kind of some secrets to the admissions process that you can share that maybe people need to think about when really going the extra mile for some of their schools?
Yeah. So the first one, I'll just go ahead and say it. People, like, admissions committees care about themselves more than they care about you. And I think this applies to whether you're applying to law school or a job or something like that. I think a lot of times students have this perspective of what's in it for them. Yeah. I want to go to this school because it's in New York. I want to go to this school because it's ranked like this. I want to go here because the network is good, or it's really good for IP, or whatever it is. The school doesn't care.
Right?
What does the school care about? The school is looking to admit the strongest class that they can eventually brag about, and who's going to be successful and give money back to them, and that they can say, hey, Lee is one of ours.
Right.
And so I think, like, that completely changes the way you approach things. That doesn't mean you don't write about yourself, but also consider who your audience is. If you just say, I want to go here because I want to take advantage of X, Y, and Z, and I want to do blah, blah, it's like, okay, well, fine, but, like, you're not making me feel special, right? And with admissions, dating analogies weirdly work well.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if someone asks, well, why do you want to be together? And you say, well, like, I feel like your job schedule fits really well with mine. I feel like you're a great cook and I love to eat. Like, if you make it just me focused, it's not going to be very attractive to your potential partner, right? So think of law school admissions in the same way. So if there's a school, like if you say, oh, and you're based in New York, it's like, oh, so if we weren't based in New York, you wouldn't be excited about our school. And so anytime you wonder, like, hey, should I talk about their location? Should I talk about this opportunity they have? Should I talk about X, Y, and Z? Like, yes, fit is important, but also consider that they are the ones with the power here. Yeah. And so how can you demonstrate your background, qualities, stories, experiences, etc., that make it really compelling for them? Like, for instance, if a school has a really strong environmental law program and you discuss, your experiences with environmental law and how you want to do that moving forward, you don't want to just say, like, oh, and you guys offer a great program, so I want to stay there. Talk about, it's just a framing thing. Like, how can you contribute to a certain initiative or a certain program? How would you take advantage of that opportunity in a way that betters that law school's community? What do you intend to do moving forward with the skills you gain there and give back to that area? Right?
I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about admissions that also I think can be applied to jobs in the future. Of, like, what can you do for the person who you're asking the favor from?
Exactly. It's like the JFK quote, right? Like, don't ask what your country can do for you.
Yeah.
Ask what you can do for your country. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's true, considering who it is you're talking to and what you're asking of them.
Yeah, I think that's really a great way to think about it. And, then that circles back to that story idea, right? What is it about you and your story that's going to make you a great alum? So,
yeah, seriously.
Yeah, because you're an alum a lot longer than you are a student.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And they're thinking about that relationship. So, what do you bring to the table, not for these next 3 years, but also, like, what is your potential for success as a partner, as a judge, as a business person, a donor, whatever it is. Schools rely on that stuff, right? And a lot of a school's, fame and rank and prestige is tied to things like alumni giving and endowments and alum and networks and things like that. It's really important.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, one thing you mentioned in your intro about yourself, and I wanted to make sure we talk about it before we finish up, is money, that you managed to go to school without saddling yourself with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, which I think is an accomplishment for almost anyone. So can you share a few snippets of wisdoms of how to think about finances when you're making this decision to go to law school?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first it starts with research before you even apply to places. Yeah. So if financial aid is like a huge consideration or a significant consideration, then you want to make sure to look into schools that have a track record of meeting a certain amount of need. And whether that's need-based need-based aid or merit-based aid, right? Mm-hmm. Because certain law schools might have a better track record for giving based on need or merit or things like that, and then plan accordingly. So for instance, if it's a school that's hyper competitive and it's rare for someone to like stand out so much academically to get merit-based aid and stuff like that, well, chances are even if you get in there, they're not going to give you tons of money. Now, if that same school is committed to like class diversity when it comes to, ethnic background or socioeconomic background or things like that, then, that might be a good fit for you. If you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, how do you get some of this information? Like if students are researching this, how do they find out based on school to school?
It's going to vary from school to school. Like this is where you want to dig into certain forums. You want to speak with different schools. Do your research, like call admissions committee, like offices.
Okay.
A lot of them will be, willing to share, if they give good financial aid, they're also going to brag about their financial aid. Like that's going to be something that they're really proud of, right? And so figure out, and then if there are certain, like I said, if there are certain specialties the school has, maybe they offer a scholarship for people who are really interested in public policy and your stats are really strong for that school, and that might be a good candidate for you. So that's on the front end in terms of researching and all that kind of stuff. Now, when you get into a law school, if certain schools offer you aid and other ones don't, it doesn't hurt to ask if they can adjust their financial aid. You can be nice about it, right? This isn't like go in there like a jerk and negotiate and play hardball or anything like that. Thank them for their admission offer. Let them know where else you got aid from. Let the school know that you actually really want to attend theirs and they're your top choice or whatever.
Yeah.
And obviously don't lie about that. Be as honest as you can. You can say, I'm strongly considering attending your school and stuff like that, but the money is prohibitive, all that kind of stuff. And see. The other thing is, I think students focus a little bit too much on what schools offer, right? So they'll either apply to places that, offer need-based aid, or they'll take the bigger fish in a smaller pond strategy, which is apply to schools where you're super qualified to get into, because then they will try to attract you with scholarship offers, right? Rather than let you walk to a T14 school or whatever it may be.
Right.
But the other thing is, and this is the strategy I use and many people I know who graduated debt-free use, is apply to a combination of places that offer aid, but also apply for tons of scholarships. And scholarships is, I know what people are thinking oftentimes, okay, like where do I even find those? Like I know everybody says there's a lot of free money out there, but where is it? How do I find it? How do I apply for them, etc. And I always encourage people to look where other people don't look. Okay?
Yeah.
So private scholarships are probably the best way to find money that other people aren't really competing for. And they can be regional, they can be related to ethnic background, they could be related to certain type of law you want to practice, or like I said, economic background, whatever it is. Like, for instance, I'm Armenian American, and when I was applying, or when I was in college and graduate school, for some reason Armenians like to give scholarships to other Armenians.
Okay.
So all these Armenian scholarships, but like, they weren't that competitive. Like maybe I literally remember, Lee, there were several of them that said like, you're such a great applicant and all that kind of stuff. And you were the only one who applied.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, great. I'll take it.
Well, then I definitely am qualified.
Yeah,
the only person.
And I tell people all the time, like, competition is great, but not when it's for free money.
That's true.
So like, look for places where people aren't looking. And so like, this is going to sound strange, but like the less official, or like the like less developed website typically something has, or the more niche something is, like, oh, you should be, I don't know, Korean American, left-handed, and a vegetarian, or something like that. Like, and if you fit those things, like the more niche something is, the more likely you are to receive it.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm giving these examples like sort of tongue in cheek, right? But it makes the point of the more niche you get, if you qualify for it, the better odds you have.
Yeah.
And so like build a spreadsheet of all these opportunities, what the eligibility requirements are, when the due dates are. Chances are you can use your law school personal statement for most of these scholarships, modify and recycle them to meet their mission and so on. And you just like go crazy, apply. And so you're only sort of limited by your research and your willingness to submit. And don't assume something is more competitive than it actually is.
I think that's a really good point. And also it goes back to kind of a larger point of if you want this to happen for you, you got to hustle, and it's sure. Like doing this research and working your angles and and finding the breadth of scholarships and applying and kind of going after it. I think that sometimes people really forget how much a lot of student debt can really hang over your heads, especially when you're trying to someday buy a house or start a family, or we were just talking about paying for preschool. Like all of these things, start to come up. And I think, doing this work and hustling, maybe even when you're young and you're not thinking about those end goals, it's really going to pay off in the end.
Absolutely. And one other thing I want to highlight, Lee, is like when we think about these big numbers, like 200,000 or 50, 150, whatever it is. And then you see these scholarships for like 2,000, 3,000. Right. I think sometimes people think like, that's not going to make a dent or something like that. Except these things add up. Yeah. Right. So like law schools, I don't know, 40, 50K a year, but you get like 10,000 in scholarships. Well, that's 20% of, your $50,000 tuition. And it's not just about lowering it from 50 to 40. The interest that this debt accumulates is rough.
Yeah.
And so accruing interest on a smaller loan will be worth tens of thousands of dollars in the future.
Yeah.
So it's more than just reducing your amount today. It's a much bigger thing than that.
I think that's a really good point. And, you never know where money can come down the line. So maybe, your first year, you're kind of doing 5,000 here, 5,000 there, but maybe the next year, you are a teaching assistant and that's some sort of, money. Or I was on the board of my law review, and for my status as one of the editors, I got discounted tuition. And that's kind of how I got paid for that role. And so I didn't know that was on the table, but that took a big chunk out of my tuition. And so you take a big chunk out of something through that, and then you still have some of these, $5,000, $2,000, all you start to add all of this up, and it becomes real money. And I think that people forget that, yeah, you're looking at a bigger picture, and $2,000 that you don't have to pay interest on is great. Take it.
Yep.
It's worth
and there's
it.
a snowball effect.
Yeah.
If you go into year 2 armed with 5 scholarships from the prior year, and you apply to a 6th scholarship, and they see you have a track record of getting all these scholarships, they think, oh wow, this person must be really good. Look at all the awards they've won. Mm-hmm. So it also so each scholarship you get makes you more attractive for the next one.
Yeah. So
there's this this exponential sort of snowball effect.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good point. Well, I think that gives folks a lot to think about, but also to just chew on making, a very thoughtful decision and not just going down the U.S. News rankings and only applying to schools that they think are going to look good in the end, because it's a more complicated decision than that.
Of course. Yeah, there's a lot to process here.
So before we wrap up, because we have to go soon, do you want to share a bit about what you do in your business, and if people want to learn more about you, how they can learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. I help people get into law school. So everything involved in that process. So from choosing school list to, choosing rec letter writers, writing great essays, writing diversity statements, interviewing if that's what you have to do for a certain school. Everything involved in the admissions process, we do. And so, folks can go to our website to find resources. Lee, perhaps you can link to our law school personal statement guide.
Absolutely.
Folks can think about how we think about storytelling, and that'll also link to things like diversity statement and just larger law school admissions guides and things like that. But I'm very reachable. So just you can email me. You can find the email on the website. Shirag at Shemmassianconsulting.com, and I'd love to answer anyone's questions.
Great. Well, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me. I'm sure this won't be the last time we get to chat, but I encourage people to reach out to you if they want information. And I think I had a lot of fun talking. So thanks so much. Yeah,
likewise. It was such a pleasure. Thank you, Lee.
All right. And with that, we're out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.